Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Cybersecurity is about more than just technology. It's about how people behave with emails, data, and cloud applications that directly impacts your company's security posture. Security works best when it's ingrained in the culture of your organization. To learn how to build a security culture and transform your employees from targets into a strong line of defense, head to securityweekly.com/proofpoint and visit their Cybersecurity Awareness Center.
Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly, or Adrian's Security Weekly. Join Security Weekly and Keep Your Security for a webinar on October 21st to learn why zero-knowledge encryption matters. Go to securityweekly.com/webcasts to register for that one. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they are available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. I can't wait for it. I haven't been out of the house since RSA 2020. I haven't left the house once. Keynotes from Alyssa Miller, John Strand, Leslie Carhart, and Dave Kennedy. Visit securityweekly.com/unlock to register and check out our rockstar lineup. Now, on to the Security Weekly news. I am looking forward to this. So I don't know if you guys have already checked these out, but I've categorized things and labeled things and sorted things. I got very organized.
Much time in your day.
So organized.
That's all I'm saying.
Very organized. Lots of comments and stuff.
You didn't
like
color code them, so I'm really disappointed from that perspective.
I put in the request for that feature.
Okay.
It's not a wait for Marcin to implement that feature in.
So I see we're passing the buck like any good executive. Okay, good job, sir.
I've learned some things.
It's on the roadmap.
So the first category of things I have is just there have been so many Microsoft things, and these aren't all negative. These aren't all bad, but there have been some real interesting Microsoft Cloud Azure kind of issues, let's say, over the last couple of weeks that have popped up. And yeah. So one of them, Azure Active Directory, you can brute force to your heart's content, apparently, if you use the right APIs to do it. So that's number 3.
Right. So I had a point of parliamentary procedure issue with that article. I mean, I understand what they're saying, but in my mind, brute forcing is always a possibility. Therefore, it's not technically a vulnerability, which I think somewhere in the article, Microsoft, some division of Microsoft.
You don't have to call it a vulnerability, but there's no mitigations for it, and there's apparently no visibility into it. Like they won't even tell you that it's going on. There's no easy way to tell that it's happening.
Well, I think the vulnerability is that, and I think what they sort of beat around the bush. They didn't come out and saying, but some part of it is allowing you to do multiple guessing, and it's not bounded in any way, shape, or form.
Exactly.
Whereas like PCI only lets you try 6 password attempts before you're supposed to lock the system up for 30 minutes at a minimum. Which
this would not pass that requirement.
It would not.
It would not.
I mean, it's part of the integration for Kerberos, like the single sign-on. We've got this kind of hybrid method that requires a ton of complexity, and you're right. Like brute forcing has always been kind of a thing. It is the endpoints at which we brute force. EWS has been a pain point for many years. We brute force against it because there's minimal visibility. OWA was the first one, and they've got visibility around it. There's lockouts, there's conditional access, things you can do. EWS, kind of the same thing. We're just starting to see a lot of these endpoints and APIs begin to be abused. I mean, federated services has been abused for a while, but there's means for Sentinel to discover them. There's ways that you can lock and get visibility and protect it. This is just going to be an ongoing thing because it is such a complex beast between Active Directory, Active Directory Federated Services, and Azure Active Directory, all different things. And there's different ways in which each of these connect and integrate with inside of your environment and outside of your environment.
I think you nailed it there, Tyler. You know, the main issue with AD in general, you know, and now that AD is extended into Azure, is a number of different ways you can configure it and use it, and it's a complex beast. And it's just going to be a lot of legwork, a lot of labor, you know, to make sure you address all of this stuff, because this can be mitigated, you know, in some ways. But yeah, it's just a challenge. I mean, to the point where, you know, it looks like Microsoft is overlooking and missing some of this stuff. They've got so much going on with Azure.
Well,
okay,
it's
so
really hard.
what could they do?
Yeah, so they can just brute
I've got
force
my
to their
thoughts,
heart's content and you know, find passwords, find working passwords, basically.
Right. So if they just said lock it out after 30, slow it down to, if you do 10, no entries until for 30 minutes. You know, whatever
zero
that kind of thing. I mean, these are. Sorry?
Yeah, you run into a problem because the endpoint that this one directly applies to is a single sign-on between auto logon for on-prem AD and the Azure AD. And so there's Kerberos tickets and SPNs that are utilizing these for synchronization and communication between the two domains. And so it's not necessarily a user account or
right.
a.
It's not user facing, right, Tyler?
Yeah, it's an API that's using auto login where you're requesting certain tickets across certain communication channels, and it's an entire process breakdown for each of those for the synchronization across that. So it's not necessarily just username and password. It's an endpoint for specific transport communication of Azure AD and on-prem AD.
So maybe the ability you need is to lock down access control to it, not necessarily, you know, the rate limiting or something like that.
Yeah, and some of that is because of how the client is accessing this single sign-on. They're utilizing the single sign-on token for the auto login capability to go through, pass through Azure AD to on-prem AD. And so there's a lot of things. You got two different servers, two different premises for clients utilizing different tokens for auto login communication that's being passed to an endpoint and providing that TGS and ticket granting services. So it is a highly complex environment.
And a good comment by Dimitri on Discord is that, you know, another big issue here is that you can't see it happening. You know, we do need logs for that kind of thing somewhere, you know, so that we can respond to it and at least manually do something about it.
Well, especially if you're not going to be able to throttle it at all, limit it, and you know, from what I'm hearing, Tyler saying it, that's kind of problematic to limit it. Okay, so then monitor it for excess usage.
Shouldn't UEBA style stuff spot this and alert on this?
If Microsoft gives you the logs for it, yes.
Yeah. So these aren't going to be typical logs, right? In fact, there's not going to be logging per se for this because this is essentially web requests across XML files to API endpoints that's included inside of transportation. So the log may happen for the end result of the communication to the service on the other side for like an Active Directory log or a Sentinel log on the Azure AD side. But you're talking about something inside of a web request or SOAP. In fact, I think it's a SOAP request. And so this is happening inside of a transport on top of that.
And ideally, like Tyler, I don't see why this can't be available in Azure Sentinel, right? Like Microsoft could make that happen.
I think it is, but it takes a pretty specific setup looking for this specific thing. And this is barely identified as one of the endpoints that can be, sprayed against or brute forced. So yeah, you can most definitely probably do this with Sentinel, but you have to have this set up, and you have to know the very specific SOAP request from which endpoint you're looking at and targeting. And so this is fairly new, and again, I think we're going to see more of these.
Yeah. So moving on to number 2, talking about mitigations for Microsoft issues. Microsoft has added their own. So this one really got me, and a lot of people are kind of celebrating this and saying, "Hey, more vendors should do this." But at the same time, I'm not sure I've seen Microsoft do something like this before. But they're adding basically a component that's going to be on by default for Exchange servers. That's basically it's kind of like a host intrusion prevention or like a WAF component that's in line. It looks like that can block, or it's kind of like virtual patching. If you've seen virtual patching done with WAFs and things like that, where it can in the future they can automatically deploy mitigations to it if new vulnerabilities are found in Exchange, so that they can automatically block them. And this clearly looks like a response to all the Exchange vulnerabilities we've seen over the 2021, right?
You add this to the fact that they are pushing a hotfix to disable a protocol on Exchange for basic authentication. I think you have that in another story, but they're pushing a hotfix for basic, basic auth, which is a good thing. But the fact that they're pushing that, how many custom implementations, client applications, custom programming may still utilize that in legacy apps? And then you combine the fact that they're going to do active blocking on by default IPS and WAF. It kind of shows the shift of where Microsoft's head is and how they're trying to push their clients to maybe the O365 solution, maybe just a more secure, proactive stance. But that has a lot of connotations, and there's a lot of problems with doing that because not everybody is ready. I agree, everybody should be, but there's a lot of business reasons they don't do it.
That's forever the dilemma with Microsoft, though, is like, okay, why haven't you fixed this yet? Because it's going to break customers, and then they go and do fix things, and it breaks customers, and they've set themselves up to where it's kind of a lose-lose situation for some of these.
So they may as well be secure, right? Like, I think that is what their stance is. It's lose-lose.
Yeah.
So we may as well force better security and stop dealing with the aftermath of all these customers getting ransomed and dealing with that fallout. So why not pushing them to security? That seems like a good place to be because they are at a lose-lose. Like, other places have done this from the beginning, and so they're not. Everyone is kind of used to it in their ecosystem. Microsoft's not been that customer or that vendor for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think the move in Windows 10 to automatically reboot to apply patches was a big move for Microsoft and kind of put them into this era of, okay, we're now comfortable with automatically doing stuff to customer environment.
Yep. Let me throw something out there. I mean, this is probably not a popular opinion, but I have a problem with this. And the problem is not that it's a good idea. I think it is in its own way a good idea. I think there's very good arguments for it. Don't get me wrong. I worry about all of the customers that are there that have custom software, in-house software, legacy software, all sorts of stuff, that integrations, blah, 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 that are going to have significant problems with this kind of emergency patching that they're not going to be able to test or check or whatever. And it's going to incentivize people to only use commercial off-the-shelf software. It's going to incentivize them to go into more and more and more of a walled garden environment. I realize I'm being a little, the sky is falling, but...
Well, anybody can reconfigure this however they want. They're not forced to accept this configuration or to use the Exchange on-premises mitigation tool. But Microsoft is throwing this stuff out as the default. You can absolutely change the defaults. So yeah, some of the advice there is going to be, as soon as you roll out that new version, disable Exchange on-premises mitigation tool, which I don't think has an easy acronym. I think I have to say the whole thing because otherwise it's EOP.
FUBAR.
It's an IOPS.
FUBAR. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. I mean, I see Josh's point, but I think Microsoft is trying to play to the lowest common denominator, greatest common denominator. I wasn't good at math. Sorry. Greatest common denominator. That might be it too. Too much PCI talk, and we're not even done yet. I think the majority of companies out there don't have solid programs, aren't looking at this kind of stuff, and they're better off, generally speaking, by having this thrust upon them. Those that are wise and those that have mature organizations will be more selective and evaluate. But for the greater good, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Star Trek.
And honestly, those companies need to be moved anyway. Like, they are the ones that cause problems, and they're usually the squeaky wheel, which are usually the low 15% that don't have budget, don't have talent or training, or have upper management that doesn't buy in. So let's just get them secure by making them.
Yeah, and I'm for it. Anytime Microsoft wants to introduce a tool here like Laps, I think was a big win. They didn't automatically, force people to change all the local admin passwords or anything like that, but they made it available and you could use it. And each time they introduce one of these tools, at least people have the option of doing things better, right? It's worth something.
No, I think anything that Microsoft's doing, especially around Exchange has always been, and probably will always be, one of the big pain points for Microsoft until everybody gets that shift to, O365, which is never going to happen. There's always going to be an on-prem solution for a lot of these clients that's how they're going to do it.
And that takes us into the next story here. Number 4, BLUETEAM, 70% of companies saying migrating to the cloud is a top priority, which, of course, doesn't mean that the existing legacy environment is going away for anybody. Like, we're just adding on new stuff.
We're going to do it. That's not the only issue, though. Come on.
I don't know. Is it one of the stories about the Azure running out of space?
No. Was that?
Oh, yeah. You can't spin up any Azure systems right now. They have no VMs left available. Not a joke.
What? Oh my goodness! What are you doing, Microsoft?
Did you read that on TikTok?
Is the number of VMs based on a 32-bit architecture or 64?
No. They literally ran out of hardware to let you spin crap up. So if you spin something down, they sent out a notice earlier today. If you spin something down, you might not be able to spin it back up.
There's a hardware limitation to virtual. What?
Remember, virtual is just somebody else's computer. When they run out of computers, you're done.
Well, they really shouldn't. So, and it's interesting, in AWS, there's
they spin up virtual
dozens
hardware
of different hard limitations that you have in AWS. That's mainly just trying to keep you from foot gunning yourself, I think. But if you're not aware of them, if you're not aware that there's a 5,000 account limitation, for creating accounts within an AWS account, if you build a product, say, on top of that, you're going to hit that at one point, and all of a sudden you can't onboard more customers. So I know there's a lot of virtual limitations to within public clouds, to expand stuff, but. Yeah, if Microsoft is actually running out of real hardware, that's kind of embarrassing.
That sounds like fake news, and they've got an operation that they're spinning up for utilization of something that they needed the power.
I think it's a supply chain.
It's entirely possible that it's very temporary
blockchain.
But there's one, and if you give me 1 second, I'll find and that's just because it's quickly to find the Reddit post on that. But
didn't you just post it in?
I threw it into a Discord, and then Down Detector. There were several reports of Azure being out in the last 24 hours. It was a day ago. Sorry, it wasn't today. It was yesterday. But yeah,
it's now because they got Amazon.
Somebody responded to that post that said, likely to be somewhat our fault as we've just reserved 75,000 nodes in EUS2 for 6 weeks and another 60,000 in Northeast.
Wow.
That might be why. There you go. But I mean, the point is that there are limits.
Yeah,
Which is fun.
yeah. I mean,
But
it's not often that happens.
seriously,
But yeah,
is it a limit actually in the hardware, or is it a limit in seriously whatever variable that they declared to set up these things? Because I'm sure they count them, and is it a limitation in the size of the variable?
I mean, a data center has.
There's of course there's hard limits, and it's if somebody wants to spool up a bajillion instances, you can't anticipate that, which is why they put in those soft limits.
I mean, if you run out of machine, it is hard to spin up another VM. They try to make it seem as if there is no end to the machines, but there effectively is. There's only so many machines there are in the world.
Yeah, I mean, the best you can do is look at how many machines somebody spun up yesterday and respond to that for tomorrow. If one day somebody decides to spin up 1,000 times more than anybody has spun up before, you can only be so prepared for that.
And you have to add the supply chain and a lot of the chip issues with getting hardware right now. Like, this is an issue for everybody. You have more money, there is a limitation on the ability for shipping, for time to manufacture. Even quantity is still a problem. So, rare earth metal is the next war.
Oh, actually, can I throw something else in that? Because I just talked to a gentleman today.
Oh, sure. Why not? Go for it.
So apparently, if you want electronics for Christmas, buy them now. They're going.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
The supply chain is about to get crunked.
How's the supply
badly.
chain of bourbon doing? Anybody know?
That's mostly in the U.S. We're okay there.
Okay.
The ransoms of alcohol shops has not been a thing, and I think there's maybe a reason for that. I don't know.
Scotch is more of an issue, because it has to be, most of it on average is aged longer than bourbon.
No, the supply chain and electronics, matter of fact, they're shutting factories down in China because of electricity shortages, which is one of the reasons I believe that they actually outlawed Bitcoin mining in China entirely now.
I was going to say, because they banned cryptocurrency there, like that should fix that problem real quick.
Which, by the way, if you look, China, the country, is one of the top holders of Bitcoin, but we're going to ignore that for a minute.
Well, and they banned using cryptocurrency there, not mining it there.
Oh, they banned mining it too.
Mining it because of the electricity.
Yes.
I
don't know if it's because of electricity, but they banned mining.
One of the reasons.
Oh, okay. I thought it was just the usage. Okay.
But no, they've been shutting factories down. They've been like, hey, you want a factory? Shut it down tomorrow for 3 days. And you're like, I need to manufacture stuff. Don't care. Shut it down.
Yeah. No,
and they
don't mess around.
No, they don't. So they're shutting factories down. That's an electricity shortage. The chip shortage is huge, of course. There's certain companies in our industry that are basically out of everything they sell, hardware-wise. It's very difficult. So if you want electronics, like I was thinking about a laptop. I think I'm going to go this weekend and buy one.
And bringing it back to cloud is interesting because a lot of the cloud providers produce their own hardware.
But they still use the chips and the stuff from China.
Designs and manufacturers. Yeah. No, they're still probably dependent on third-party chips. But like the main processors and stuff like that, like Amazon has their own chip fab. Not for all of the chips they use in the systems, but for like main processors and stuff like that for their switches.
So what happens when we get to a point in cloud where the scalability and the reason you went to the cloud, you can't scale anymore as an organization? And this big shift is now a availability problem.
Well, I think the first sign is Netflix would stop working, since they're probably one of the most hardcore gung-ho AWS users. So if they start having problems, then I'd start to worry. But as long as your Netflix still works,
or start having this type of problem.
I think we should move on,
you
Adrian.
cited.
I really want to get to your BlackMatter.
Well, getting back to the topic, and I'm not sure it's a security related issue, but why so many companies wanting to go to the cloud? I guess there is a security question in there somewhere. the advantages or disadvantages of the cloud versus on-prem from a security perspective.
It's not. There isn't there is a security. There are security reasons for going to the cloud, and it's really kind of the same as the business reasons for going to the cloud. It's the ability to move quickly, to make changes quickly. You don't have to commit to something for 18 months, for any particular architecture or decision you've made. You can fail very, very quickly. You can make a mistake and say, well, that architecture didn't work. Here's a new Terraform or CloudFormation file. Let's try it this way instead. And you can throw that together.
We also seen a big shift from all the early adopters of the cloud, right? That are now have learned their lesson and figured out what works in the cloud and what doesn't. And there's been a massive shift back where they've had a lot of lessons learned. And the hybrid approach seems to be those that adopted early are either moving all the way back to on-prem and scaling up because they found the cost, or they're doing a hybrid and being very, very deliberate about the things that they do put in the cloud and scaling only what is needed and shifting back to on-prem, because there are a ton of things that are great and you can add some security, but there's a ton of stuff you don't control. And there's a layer of complexity that allows you even less control inside of that. And then you add on top of that the cost of it. And you've got a whole plethora of problems that then, once you've done it, you kind of figure out what works and what does not work, and you scale back very quickly.
Well, and that's a beautiful thing about infrastructure as code, is if you're using something like Terraform, it doesn't have to be in AWS. You can stand up that infrastructure anywhere, that Terraform file is going to be compatible with. So the concepts of what was kind of born in the cloud absolutely apply to on-prem as well. So like if you look at Etsy is one of the companies that really kind of coined a lot of the processes and ideas behind what we call DevOps. And they really just use AWS for bursting. When they needed extra capacity, that's when they would stand up stuff in AWS. But they traditionally kept everything in their own data center, but they still use those concepts of ephemeral systems, highly distributed systems, site reliability engineering, all that stuff. They used all those principles, but in their own data center, and just using the cloud to extend that.
I think we're getting way off topic, but
let's move on. Let's move on.
Sure. So you want to jump down to Cybercrime? We can do that.
I'm excited. I'm excited for your interview.
Go for it.
Is a surprise that has not gotten released yet. So I'm super stoked. When is that going to be released? Tell us about that.
I think it's we're having an analyst day, and I believe it's from Wednesday. I think it's 3 weeks away. So it's
analyst day. What is an analyst day?
Well, so
what are we talking about?
I think there's a security analyst day because October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and it's just something that we're doing at Security Weekly, for one day in October. And so I believe it's going to be for Enterprise Security Weekly, not 2 weeks from now, but I think 3 weeks from now. And somebody, Sam or Renee, can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
We'll all jump down your throat if you're wrong.
What is Analyst Day? Give me a clue, a hint, a smoke signal, perhaps.
Well, it's just like celebrating security analysts, so all the topics are kind of focused on defenders, basically.
During this week, there's an interview.
But it's going to be like an all-day streaming type thing. So Security Weekly will be there, Tyler. But there's also going to be like 5 hours of streaming on top of Enterprise Security Weekly. So that Wednesday, like we're going to be streaming a total of, I don't know how many hours, like 7 or 8 hours.
Ladies and gentlemen, on October 20th, it will be National Analyst Day here at Security Weekly. We'll have 10 or 20 hours of content just for you. Isn't that exciting?
Security analysts, those other analysts need not apply, need not show up. Security analysts.
Security analysts.
So what Tyler's getting excited about are stories 11, 12, is it 11? No, 12, 13, and 14. So the record is this really cool publication that Recorded Future is funding. And what they're kind of going after is a format similar to Bloomberg, I want to say. And the idea is to just kind of have this coverage, that's unique to, that's very focused on this kind of stuff. And they've got interviews with, there's an analyst, a Russian-speaking analyst at Recorded Future that has interviewed some folks from cybercrime crews, from ransomware crews. And they've got 3 of these interviews so far. And that's a lot of what we talk about on that segment that we're talking about that's going to air in about 3 weeks.
Yeah, very, very in-depth insight into how ransomware, like, unless you hang out in these forums, unless you spend a ton of time in the kind of criminal underground chats or groups and understand how the ecosystem works, it's kind of hard to understand how a lot of this ransomware plays out, what the ransomware groups are doing, how they're organized, what their thought processes are. A lot of this is, and their analysts, I've actually been looking into some of their analysts and how they're doing it. They get into the specifics of these groups and interview them, which is providing a ton of insight around things that we had to make speculations on, things that some of us knew that maybe didn't make public. There's a ton of stuff here that I think is going to be very useful for really getting a handle on what we're dealing with from a ransomware standpoint, and reinforcing the things we've been saying about how ransomware groups work, how the business operates, how initial access is handed off, how there's different groups and things happening. So all these pieces are kind of getting tied together in a very meaningful threat intelligence kind of format. It's like Bloomberg had a baby with the podcast of Darknet Diaries. It's really quite fascinating what they're getting involved in.
Yeah, and they're great to read. The links are in there, and so BlackMatter was one you were most interested in, Tyler, or the one you wanted to start with?
BlackMatter is one I've been following and in a couple groups that I keep in close contact with because they've shifted very heavily, and there's some scary stuff that they're doing. So that one's of particular interest to me.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things across these. I think it's easy to think of some of these ransomware crews as just all criminals. But once you read the interviews with each of them, they're a little bit different. Like some of them, they're very competitive with one another, and some of them, kind of, spill the tea on their competitors, or talk trash about their competitors, which I'm here for. Like I want to see more of those interviews where they're kind of trashing. Their code's terrible. Our code is much better. Our ransomware is much more modern. So there's a lot of that in there, and also the money is just crazy. Like they get them talking about money and talking about how that this one guy makes 50 million and says he's going to retire, and then he's back 4 months later, ready to go again.
50 million what? Ruble?
US dollars.
Okay.
In Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, I'd retire at that point too. I would admit, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think retiring at 50 million is a very valid thought. I mean, Adrian, I'm surprised that you would think that was a bad idea.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't say it was a bad idea at all.
It depends on the lifestyle and how many debts you owe. Like if you owe the Russian government, or you get caught and have to pay people off, like 50 million probably goes pretty quick.
Well, I mean, 50 million of what though? Like how do you
said US dollars.
Right, but how do you? I mean, certainly it's easier than the old days when they were trying to fence stolen credit card numbers, and you buy an iPhone, over here, with your stolen credit card number, and then you'd resell it over here, and that's how you're turning it into hard cash that you could actually use. With cryptocurrency, I got to wonder, with that amount, how you're turning that into. It would be great to have a guest on that can talk about the tumblers, and how they actually turn that cryptocurrency into usable cash. Into Lambos.
Usually you're not.
How do you turn 50 million in Bitcoin into a Lambo?
I teach that if you want to talk about it. So you can go to Wasabi or CoinJoin to try to make it anonymous, it's going to fail because it depends on the number of people that want, how badly they want you. If you've got somebody that's just casual about this and they've got a full-time job besides, you do Wasabi and CoinJoin and do a couple of rounds of these kinds of things, multiple wallets that aren't attached to anything, you're good. If you have a nation state actor after you, it's problematic. Okay? So you've got to be careful with that. But effectively, it's possible if you're careful to keep your money. I mean, they're still tracking. Actually, coins that have been used in ransomware are blacklisted by most legitimate exchanges. So you have to use those. If you've got blacklisted coins because they're registered as having been used for ransomware payments, you've got to use them at sort of off-license exchanges, or you can do local Bitcoin and sell them, but the exchange rate is horrible. Okay. And yeah, you can actually buy a Porsche 911 or a Lambo for Bitcoin, depending on if you buy it from a dealership or buy it used. And you can do local Bitcoin and advertise, hey, I want a Porsche, a Lambo. I will pay X number of Bitcoin, and I don't care. So no, they're not exclusivity with Lambo. Adrian,
you end up working with the mafia though. Like if you're doing this at scale. Right. And you're doing this through washers, like what ends up happening is you're working with some very shady people, and you end up in trouble. We'll say that's how a lot of these guys, they're very technical, and they may have a lot of money, and it may be the first time they have a lot of money, so they don't know how to deal with these particular groups, and so you end up with being in debt, in bed, and getting very, very screwed, and likely that's probably why some of these guys have to come back.
More money, more problems. Yeah, so
he was just pausing for effect.
Yeah, pausing for effect. Yeah, so it's interesting, talking about cashing out. One of the things we learned from the BlackMatter, well, it's conjecture. They're kind of guessing. But one of the questions that the interviewer Dimitri asks is, why do you think the Department of Justice here in the U.S. was able to recover Bitcoins from the Colonial Pipeline ransom? And they think it's because they again, kind of, first time they've had a lot of money, one of the affiliates or somebody like that transferred it to web-based wallets that were somewhere that the Department of Justice could easily seize them. Which makes a lot of sense because they got those, I think they recovered it pretty quick. It was within a week or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain wallets that are controlled. There's certain means to gain access, and there's a lot of entities that are tracking, openly tracking, and sometimes closed tracking all of these wallets or exchanges. So
yeah,
their ability to be in bed with, you think these things start up out of nowhere and don't have cooperations and agreements in order to operate. Like there's a lot going on in the backside of this.
You got to
understand that a lot of the exchanges are going KYC, AML, know your customer, anti-money laundering, and to do so, they have to agree that if law enforcement shows up with a subpoena, they hand over the money. And so that if that money passes through an exchange on its way to somewhere else, one of the ones that's controlled, within minutes, within seconds, actually, they'll get a phone call and an email and somebody knocking on their door because they believe in redundancy. These federal agencies do, and it'll be, hi, turn this over.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
But the bad guys are going to know, like they're going to know which exchanges those are, right? Like they're going to know as good as
ascribing intelligence, and sometimes that's true, and sometimes that's not.
Well, and that's one of the things we learn about these crews is like, again, some of them are criticizing the other ones, like, going after critical infrastructure was so dumb. So you've got BlackMatter, talking smack about REvil, kind of turning up the heat on themselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting how, like, again, a lot of these people are very, very technical. A lot of these crews have, operated. That doesn't necessarily mean they know the ropes of how money laundering works, how criminal organized crime works and functions, and a lot of them may be just getting into the contacts necessary to do that. So you've got a lot of disparate workers in, say, Ukraine, Eastern Bloc, Russia, people that had skills or were working for government entities or even technical companies that went under during COVID or were laid off. They had to supplement some of that income, and they're not necessarily criminals or have operated in those criminal spaces that have contacts there. So they're just learning how a lot of this works and how to deal, and that's probably problematic for many of them.
Yeah, so you're talking about how big these are and how distributed. REvil was talking about having as many as 60 affiliates at one point in time, and it's grown to a point to where they have the luxury of deciding how much of the actual work they want to do. So some of them saying like we're not even interested in hacking VPNs and stuff like that. Earlier in the Qualis segment, we're talking about some of these actors going after RDP and stuff like that. A lot of times it sounds like those are going to be affiliates, not the company that actually gets in and does that kind of internal piece that we're talking about. Looks like a pen test these days.
They may not
remember
even
in the. Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying a lot of those aren't even affiliates. A lot of those are secondary companies and or initial access from a criminal group that hands it off to either an affiliate or their known connection with inside of one of the groups, because the groups are pretty tight and they're pretty small. And having a connection with inside of those are handed just like drugs. They're handed through the distribution chain and up the chain. Like you don't know who's talking to who, and that gets passed off.
Oh, so that's interesting, Tyler. So there are groups that are like lower than affiliates that are.
Yeah,
they're customers. They're customers and partners. You have, the Zeus banking Trojan, for example, was great. In that sense, Zeus banking Trojan, the people that built it didn't use it. They rented it to other companies, other people, other organizations, other groups.
Yeah,
so they were
same
customers.
thing with botnets, right?
What's that?
Same thing with botnets. A lot of the botnets.
Yeah, exactly. So now you're talking about if I am a specialist in initial access, and then I hand it over to the I sell this company to the ransomware gang, like Tyler was talking about, and so Dimitri's going, every time we say affiliates, I can't stop picturing some multi-level marketing thing trying to sell skin cream. And it's sort of the same thing in a sense. You develop relationships with other groups and you do initial access, and then you like, okay, who's going to give me the best price for a medical company? Oh, you are. Who's going to give me the best price for a financial services company? You are. So I'll sell them to you and you. And I sell them to them, and then they do the ransomware, and then they have money mules, there's a chain of criminality that goes through this whole thing.
All right, should we move on?
Please.
Yeah, so another interesting trend here, going back to story number 5, where we've got a couple trends here, and we'll get into ZERODAYS. Mandatory reporting of breaches. It sounds like we've got more and more push and support for, again, I don't think it's going to be 100% of everybody, but they're definitely talking about private businesses, some kind of mandatory reporting of breaches, which I think is, I agree with their statement here that it's way overdue.
So here's the kicker. You've got CISA who's saying this, and Jen Easterly and Chris Inglis, and now they've got Alan Friedman just joined CISA as well. They're really building a pretty solid team of actual cyber experts and actual people that can get stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah, but still, there needs to be legislation. Like we're pre-legislation at this point. No, we're
not. No, we're not. 49 or 50 states have breach reporting legislation, mandatory breach reporting legislation. The legislation is there on the state level. Do we need it on the federal level? Yeah, I think we do. You're right there. But the legislation is there to mandatorily report breaches under certain circumstances. There's also the compliance standards. Hey, Jeff, what's the mandatory reporting notification limit or timeline on PCI?
It's funny that you bring that up, Josh, because I have a couple comments on that. Specifically, the answer to your question is 72 hours. But the notification is not to the public, it's to the card brands. That's point number 1. Point number 2, most of the companies that I've worked with over the years that have suffered a breach, a compromise of credit card data, they had no clue it was happening. They didn't detect it. they had to have the card brands come to them and say, hey, we've been doing our little fraud detection thing, and they've got all sorts of fancy algorithms where they find the point of common interaction. They're like, hey, there's a bunch of cards being used for fraud. What do they all have in common? Oh, this gas station at the corner of Elm Street and Main Street in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, or something like that. And so they call the gas station up and say, hey, we think you guys have been compromised. That's usually how companies, at least in the PCI space, are finding out about breaches. There are exceptions, but that's probably the vast majority of companies. So, I guess my opinion of this is, okay, yeah, this is great. Find out that there's breaches happening so everybody can take action and learn from the mistakes and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it's more a matter of who's the responsibility fall on for reporting the notification, because the card brands find out about a whole lot of stuff happening long before the merchants do. Just as an example, thoughts?
So I want to sort of piggyback on that for just a second. So the kicker is that I talked about this earlier today, that actuarial tables don't work for cybersecurity because we don't have all the information and because it's different from cars and auto accidents. However, if we don't have all the data, we can never even start building the actuarial tables. If we do mandatory reporting, we can build the actuarial tables. It's literally that simple. You can't do analysis on data you don't have.
Well, so I mean, currently what's getting reported is not enough for us to really do anything useful with, like knowing somebody has a breach or how many records have been leaked or something like that doesn't tell us that somebody clicked a link in a phishing email, and then they pivoted and, did whatever. Like those details, like the kind of stuff that we see in the really high profile cases, can be useful, and I'd love to see that more standardized, because same thing with traffic accidents with the NTHSA. Like that wouldn't be useful either if you didn't have those details on it was an offset crash or it was a frontal crash, or how the crash occurred, how people were injured. That
Adrian,
kind of
you're raising
details. Jeff.
All right.
Yeah.
I accidentally unplugged my headset. You're raising a really good point. I was
wondering what happened.
Yeah. I couldn't hear you. I probably could still talk and you'd hear me. Does any of this proposed legislation talk about details, or is simply notification?
No.
Something bad happened. That's
kind of my frustration. And also, like you were saying, this requires reporting to the government, not to the public.
Right.
So this is different from the state level legislation that we've seen, which will specifically say, you got to either notify your customers or notify the media if you can't specifically notify those customers. Like a lot of that legislation is very specific about telling the people who are affected. In this case, this is a lot of this is about telling the government directly. And I guess
to cut to the
maybe
chase,
the government then tells everybody, but
I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't read there are draft bills. I haven't read them.
But I mean, these draft bills have been around for years and years and years. I remember when I worked at Tenable, Ron Gula had me join him down in DC one time. We were meeting with some former congressional aides working on some subcommittee talking about, how do we improve cyber? I forget what the exact context was, but it all, eventually the conversation, or sooner rather than later, it came around to notification. I will throw it on the public record. I don't get it. Why does all this talk about the government needs to intercede and step in, and then it always boils down to breach notification? The EO that came out back in January, February, most of that had to do with the notification. I don't get it. I have never understood and don't understand why that's what the government seems to want to lead with. Anybody explain it to me why they think that's the place to start.
Oh boy.
Nobody has an answer. Good, let's move on. It's not just me.
Okay.
I think I think a lot of this is just kind of throwing stuff against a wall and seeing what sticks. And
agree.
Same thing with automotive.
Oh, that's right. It's government
legislation.
They gotta have the appearance of doing something. It's not as important to actually do anything meaningful.
Well, it's not just that a lot of the knee-jerk kind of stuff isn't really what you want to see anyway. Like, you want to see maybe some of those bills not get passed, and the next bills kind of build upon that and get things a little bit more. I don't know. But certainly dealing with breach legislation at the state level is not easy for companies. Is not ideal.
Well, and I think
even China has like a GDPR now. They've kind of beat us to the punch on that.
Well, we have CCPA and CPRA is coming in, and we've got various forms of legislation at the state level. But I mean, what you're talking about is what, and I mean, we haven't even talked about the core question: is what is a breach? Can you define a breach, please?
Yeah, and we've got a bunch of different definitions on that too. So that needs to be resolved as well. The thing I'm most interested in personally are the details that allow us to learn from other people's mistakes and get better, which we don't currently have from any of this legislation that I've seen. The only time we see that is when there's class action lawsuits and the actual incident report becomes public knowledge because of the legal process, or somebody on in DC takes an interest in it, and it becomes public that way. But in some form we get that investigation, the actual mandate report becomes public, and we get all those kind of details of why the breach occurred.
Yeah, I agree with you, Adrian. I think that's part of it, and I also think that's bullshit because, I've been hearing from customers in the commercial world for 20, 25 years. They're not concerned about security. They're not concerned about what should we be doing to protect ourselves. Their first question is usually some variation of, well, what's everybody else in our industry doing? Because we want to do just that much.
Yeah.
So that we can't be faulted for being irresponsible for not practicing best practices.
We didn't want to go crazy here. We want to do just a little bit more or the same.
No, just the same. There is no more. It's the whole. You don't have to be faster than the bear. You have to be faster than your friends, and then you're okay type of analogy. Unfortunately, we've evolved, and the bad guys have evolved to. Yeah, there's at least as many, if not more, bears than there are friends in this particular scenario. So now, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
have lots more friends that you can feed to the. Wait, that doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work.
Have a steady supply of friends you can feed to the bear. There we go.
That just is an unpleasant situation,
Yeah,
it is, but it boils down to, and there's also a certain amount of we're talking about two different things now. When we're talking about national security and Department of Homeland Security and CISA, which I always get confused whether it's an agency or certification. But that notwithstanding, there's absolutely a real mission that's countering national security threats, espionage, counter-espionage. I used to live in that world. I get that. And that's way, way different from the private sector that's not, frankly, worried as much about the breach, especially in the credit card world, because you as a consumer, all of us as consumers, we don't really have to worry about whether our credit card is stolen. It's not going to cost us money. It's inconvenient, right? But generally speaking, it's not going to cost us anything. So it's just this huge inconvenience. But the most of the commercial sector is driven not by, well, we're trying to do the right thing and be secure. It's how much do we have to pay for compliance? How much do we have to get fined if we're not compliant? It's all a dollars and cents things.
Yeah, business decision. Yeah,
and that's I call that the real world because that's a lot of what's going on, and part of the drive in the last year or so, the attention that's being given by the government, the spin up of the agencies and bringing in new people and power hitters and so on and so forth. From a national security perspective, great. And from a commercial perspective, And what's problematic is the crossover. Where do we draw the line between what's a national security interest versus, it's just the private sector just trying to conduct commerce and be profitable, when you get into the things like critical infrastructure and what happens if the power grid or the water company or whatever gets compromised or just ransomware and the ransomware against, what was it, the water treatment facility in Florida? I get, there's been so many of them lately. They're not doing that because of a national security. They're trying to compromise the government and undermine the economy and win a new Cold War, cyber Cold War. They're doing it because, hey, this is somebody that we were able to target and it was successful so that we can make some money. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. It might be the same group that's engaging in espionage. Maybe Tyler would have a comment, but there's things here that just don't connect. And the conversation, I think, needs to be a different conversation depending on whether we're focusing on national security interests, critical infrastructure, or the private sector. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Moving on to some other trends here, talking about ZERODAYS. I think this is a pretty short one. There's not a whole lot to talk about it, except that numerically the number of ZERODAYS discovered in 2021 has gone up. But the general take on this is that it's generally a good thing, just because we're getting better at finding ZERODAYS and uncovering them and getting them out there. And furthermore, less of those ZERODAYS are really useful to attackers. A lot of them are very complex to take advantage of. Seeing a lot of academic ZERODAYS that are difficult to use in the wild. So it's interesting. This is from Patrick Howell O'Neill at the MIT Technology Review. That seems to be the TLDR is it's complicated. But generally it sounds like they're saying, we're just getting a lot better thanks to bug bounties and things like that at finding this stuff. So the numbers are going up.
We interviewed Casey Ellis of Bug Crowd over on Security and Compliance Weekly just 2 days ago. Mm-hmm. And
I saw that one.
One of the things that happened was that over in the comments on, I think, Twitch, I don't remember, maybe YouTube, we had a gentleman that was like, well, they banned me and there was some.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And so a couple of people there were talking about, if I find a ZERODAY, I don't report it. I just sell it to ZERODAYS, or sell it to a black marketer. And it was interesting that the attitude of people, the researchers or whatever you want to call them, about ZERODAYS has changed drastically from, let me show you what I can do with this, to let me go make a lot of money.
Yeah, like half of the calls that I do with IONS, I know, Josh, you and I do a lot of IONS calls, are around vulnerability disclosure and bug bounties. And
really,
I spend most of those calls. Yeah, I spend most of those calls talking about how to deal with those researchers. Because most of the times you see these things go south is how people, how responsive they are, just kind of understanding the perspective of the researcher, and the frustration they have with trying to disclose these. And if you introduce a lot of friction into that process, if you make it difficult for people to do that, then they're just going to go the easiest path, full disclosure or sell it to somebody or whatever, but then the flip side of that, I think a lot of the folks out there discovering this kind of stuff don't understand how hard it is to fix some of this stuff. When they do actually want to do the right thing to report it to companies and stuff like that. So it's disclosure debate is no easier today, I think, than it used to be. Maybe 10 years ago.
Well, remember responsible disclosure versus full disclosure and open source tooling, and there's
and that's a trigger. You just used a trigger word. Responsible disclosure implies that you're irresponsible if you don't go that specific path. So they changed it to coordinated disclosure. So responsible disclosure is considered. It's not PC anymore. You're not supposed to say responsible disclosure. It's coordinated. Both parties are equal.
No comment. Anyway, but
yeah,
you've got okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, this goes into some Apple vulnerabilities here. One of which kind of highlights one of these issues where I think it was somebody from Spain reported a lock screen bypass on iOS 15. And, felt like he was underpaid. They didn't even fix it. They didn't even, when they patched it, they didn't even contact him to make sure that it was fixed, and just, Apple doesn't have a great history working with researchers here. So it's not a huge surprise, but, still frustrating, I'm sure, for the people that go after Apple vulnerabilities and try to report them,
Ooh, segue. Let's talk Apple and Visa.
Yeah.
And PCI.
Well, do we want to say anything else about this lock screen bypass before we jump into Apple Pay and how to steal money off an iPhone?
No, let's just go straight for the stealing money off the iPhone.
Let's go straight. Let's go straight to stealing money.
That's a juicy one.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Yeah, so I don't know if you want to introduce it, Jeff. I did quite a bit of reading on it since you posted it and shared it with us.
You probably did more than I did, so go ahead. I'll just I'll provide the color commentary.
All right, so basically the idea here, paying for things should be convenient. We all have cards in our wallets, where you can just do the contactless pay. Most smartwatches now, you can just hold up to the credit card reader and do it. And so they introduced Apple and it's not just Apple and Visa, but in general, Apple Pay and Samsung Pay have this mode called that at least the researchers are calling transport mode. And the idea is you're going through, one of these man traps or I'm trying to remember what they're called. We don't have public transportation here.
Turnstile.
Yeah, turnstile. Thank you. In Knoxville, Tennessee, you have to own a car pretty much. That's it.
Or a horse.
But yeah, as you're going through the turnstile, you don't have to unlock your phone. The turnstile sends magic bytes to your phone, which unlocks Apple Pay without you having to physically take out your phone, look at it, unlock it, Face ID, all that stuff. And you just pay and you go through. And the thing is, the researchers found you can just capture those magic bytes and do a replay attack and tell the phone that you're a turnstile and you need 1,000 pounds. And so that was one of the initial shockers for me is that, again, talking about like that brute force attack, there's no rate limiting in here. There's no limit to the transaction amount. And this is something designed for public transport. Like you should never let that transaction go to 1,000 pounds. But just using NFC, if you get close enough to a phone to
NFC,
to hit the
NFC.
Yeah, thank
NFC.
You. NFC is very different.
Very, very different. Let's not go there this episode.
Thank you, Josh. NFC. So almost direct contact within an inch or so is how close you have to get to do this. But just like skimmers work on gas pumps, where criminals will put an overlay over where you put in your card, it's as easy as that to take advantage of this thing. And I feel like Apple and Visa are really downplaying the risk of this, especially given that you can do 1,000 pounds.
Maybe Tyler could weigh in if Larry was on.
Tyler left us.
Oh, did he leave? Oh, bye, Tyler.
He did.
Yeah.
I think an inch is an exaggeration. I've been involved in some proximity tests with mobile devices with NFC, and 2 or 3 feet is what I've heard. But I'm not going to argue.
Oh, well, I mean, with like a normal device, yeah, sure. Yeah. In that case, maybe it's like some fancy antenna or something like that. But I'm talking about like where you can brush up against somebody or something like that
Right.
with a, because all you need to do this is the researchers used a Proxmark RDV4, which is a $300-$400 device. I've got one. It's how I program the chip that I've got implanted in my hand, and an Android phone. So very easy to have in your pocket, brush up against somebody, steal $1,000 from their phone with something just sitting in your back pocket or side pocket.
So the color commentary, at least initially, is Google Pay, Apple Pay, these alternative forms of payment started coming out. Gosh, they've been around a while now. Maybe 8 or 10 years ago. The attraction.
I wouldn't call them alternative forms though, because they're using the normal cards in your wallet.
Let me finish. The attraction from the merchant perspective is that because it's sort of a layer of abstraction to the credit card, it's not subject to PCI requirements. And then, woohoo! We don't have to do PCI. All we have to do is accept Apple Pay and Google Pay. There's a layer of abstraction. Absolutely. Because because
there's no PAN.
Because there's no PAN, they're using the card is registered and you're passing a token. Yes. I'm Jeff. I've got Google Pay, Apple Pay, and I have my Visa card registered, and it's card XYZ. So they're just passing token XYZ that somewhere on the back end somebody else is looking up. Oh, XYZ is Visa card. Here's the number. Send it on for authorization.
Yeah.
You're right. So the allure is merchants don't have to worry about PCI if they're accepting this form of payment. Woohoo! We can make PCI go away. The pain, the burden of compliance go away because we can accept something else because there's a layer of abstraction. And they're thinking we're not dealing with the PAN, but what it is really is a layer of abstraction. And I think it was when.
And that's correct. This shouldn't be a PCI issue. This is an Apple or a Visa issue. And one of the points the researchers make is that Apple alone could fix this, or Visa alone could fix this. But instead of either of them fixing it alone or getting together and fixing it, they both decided to just point the fingers at each other and not fix it. So the person that loses,
that's the beauty and the ugliness of the article is they're on record pointing fingers at each other. It is, though, a PCI issue in the context of if you're talking about the security of a transaction and the ability for, and this is the weird thing about PCI. PCI is all involved with trying to prevent the theft of credit card data. And what are you going to do with credit card data if you steal it? You're going to commit fraud. But it doesn't directly deal with fraud, which is a weird little wrinkle. But it's two different things.
This is impersonating a merchant, basically. This isn't stealing the credit card data. This is doing a fraudulent transaction using your own merchant ID or something like that. You need some kind of merchant account to be able to pull this off.
No,
you don't.
I don't think you do. I think you need to impersonate the ticket terminal.
It's more like a man in the middle, and they're what I read into it is they're exploiting what is apparently a trust relationship that's built in somewhere between, if something's talking to a payment terminal, they've set up some sort of, you don't have to unlock your phone, and therefore they're trusting the payment terminals. And they're doing something they're failing to validate that it's an actual payment terminal.
You're doing a retail merchant payment is what you're doing. And one of the criticisms of it is that it doesn't lock it down to just transportation merchants. You can use any kind of merchant category.
No. Actually, in the article, it says that it's impersonating a transit kiosk or terminal or turnstile or whatever, and then
they're just talking about the magic number.
Then it modifies the transaction tags to say, "Oh, by the way, you've already been unlocked. Now let's make it £1,000 or $1,000 or whatever."
Right, so, but you can't do a transaction without a merchant account. Like I mean, it's like having a virtual terminal, and a virtual terminal doesn't work without some kind of merchant account or processing account.
Well,
I'd like
that
to
might
say
be a factor,
that
but
you're
that's
right, but
not
I
true
think you're
because
not.
I think you're thinking
I mean,
about
if
the
you read the paper,
and
they explain
you can
it in
steal
the
the money. You can steal the money even though the settlement doesn't happen because the merchant ID doesn't usually come in until the settlement of the transaction. The transaction initially is authorized. You're the consumer. There's, you've got enough in your credit balance. You've got enough in your debit card. They didn't specify whether this would work with a debit card. I'm assuming it would. You can make this payment because you got enough to cover it. That's the authorization initially. Settlement comes later where the merchant ID comes in. So I could be wrong. You could be right. I don't think it's a factor here.
Well, I mean, how do you do any of that without a terminal or a merchant account? How do you authorize?
Well, the point is what they're exploiting is they're mimicking a terminal account, and somehow they're exploiting the fact that somehow Apple or Visa isn't checking something like a merchant ID. Like, is this a registered device? Is this a known path? Is this a known whatever? I think you're touching on what's making it a problem and why it's been a demonstrated attack, because they're not doing something that they could be doing in terms of validating that this is a real terminal that should be initiating this transaction. I think we
should probably read the paper, but I think it's fascinating that they're finding
it's a video.
I mean, it's just such a shocker that convenience actually opens you up to attacks. Oh my God, this is my shocked face. Like that. Yeah, you do things for convenience. It's insecure, or it could be insecure, and that's not going to help.
Well, to me, the punchline of the article was, after an Apple and Visa did their finger pointing, it's not our problem, it's their problem. They should fix it or not. And each one said, well, this isn't really a problem. The end of the article said, we tried this against other devices like Samsung devices, and I forget what the third one was, and it didn't work. So apparently there's a fix. There's something that could be done there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And they make recommendations in there. And MasterCard, 5 years ago had a fix for this. And it's just not, it's not been implemented yet. So they're fully aware of how to do this more securely. They just haven't because they don't think it's that big of an issue. And they've decided to spend their energy arguing whether or not it's an issue than actually fix it.
Right. And where this, I think, is a PCI issue is because, this has to do with payment, credit card transactions, which is largely driven by the PCI requirements. There's nothing specific in PCI that says they have to do something here. There possibly could be something, because PCI provides a lot of standards for the devices and the equipment and the card readers and the keypads and all that kind of stuff. There might be something in there that's a violation. I'm not as conversant on those standards, but largely I think they're not doing anything because they don't have to, or they don't think they have to, because nothing is driving them to do it from a regulatory, which in this case is a PCI standpoint. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this is an issue at the contactless EMV level, not at the PCI level. I think, this is not something where, merchants can fix this by implementing it differently. Like we need Visa or Apple to fix this, because it's not an issue with Samsung Pay. It's not an issue with MasterCard. It's an issue specifically with Visa and with Apple.
Well, and guess what? Samsung uses Visa also. So what's sticking out to me is Apple. Sorry, Apple. I think it's your problem. Fix
and they that's the thing with Apple. They want this very smooth user experience with their products. And absolutely they've got that here, but I mean, the fact that they haven't even put in, and that's where the finger pointing comes in, basically locking it down to a type of merchant. They haven't done that. They haven't locked down the limit, to what you can do with one of these transit transactions. Like £1,000. There's no public transport that costs £1,000 that I know of.
Hey, those Uber helicopters are not cheap. Okay, come on, man. Jeez.
No, but we're talking
subways.
We're talking subways here, Josh.
If you had a good enough helicopter driver, come on.
Tubes. Yep. The tube.
That's a good helicopter pilot that can fly through subway tubes.
Is my biggest issue with this is them arguing that this is something that can only happen in a lab, where, I don't know if you guys have seen the skimmers that criminals have come up with, but absolutely they can come up with something to take advantage of this. That's small, that fits on top of the turnstile right next to where you would normally tap your phone or whatever. Like, I have no doubt that criminals can physically build an electronic device to take advantage of this. Maybe you embed it within the counter at a bar, so when people set their Apple phone on the bar, it starts draining money out of your Visa. There's so many ways to implement this.
Do you remember at DEF CON like 4 years ago, they had the charging station that was also, if you left your phone unlocked when you plugged it in, it would also happen to take your data. Like now you're talking about
in a lab. Come on.
Yeah, that's weak. But again, and I'm not trying to beat up on Apple, but I'm still bitter that with the iPhone 4, it was designed for right-handed people, and I happen to be left-handed. Still holding that against them. But the article says the antenna was in the phone in a way that really? Left-handed people hold their phones in their right hand, and it was covering up the antenna.
Yeah, and that was the one
you heard it here.
That if you covered the gap, the antenna stopped working.
Yep.
I'm left-handed, and I always use my phone in my left hand.
Wait.
That's your challenge.
Every host on here right now is left-handed?
I'm left-handed.
So am I.
I'm
what are the odds of this?
I've learned to be ambidextrous because being left-handed is a pain. But
we're all ambidextrous because it's impossible to do everything left-handed in a right-handed world. That notwithstanding,
all three of us are left-handed. That is really weird.
The article. Well, now would be a good time to scroll up in the Discord. The talk I did, the keynote for B-Sides Charlotte last week, is talking about, how do you know you're a hacker? How do you find out you're a hacker? How do you identify people that have the potential of working in this industry? And I used myself as a model. It's like, I don't know, NSA figured out how to hire me. I know I'm a hacker now. I didn't know it then. Here's me. Is anything like other people? Does this resonate? And one of the things I brought up is left-handedness. That notwithstanding, the researchers have been talking to Apple over a year about this, and this is sort of, to me, a variation of a theme of other, and they talk about how there's similar types of attacks that they've done against, this type of technology. And again, Samsung, it's not a problem. MasterCard, it's not a problem. So, everything's pointing to Apple. You got to, and my experience working with Visa over the years and working with Apple over the years, I'm pointing the finger at Apple. Apple,
because that's the easier place to get change made. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Which is more likely if you put pressure on it, to fix it. Apple.
Right.
Oh God.
Right. But they're not getting any pushback from the PCI world because it's not technically a compliance issue because nobody's looking at it because it's not there's no credit card involved, so all
it's
their
not
merchant
technically PCI.
It's not the only thing that's going to move this are those skimmers to come out and to start hitting people. Right. I think.
Right, but
we're going to start seeing EMV skimmers.
How long does that take when actual attacks and actual damage is caused, and that's the motivation for wholesale change?
I'm predicting 4 to 6 months max.
Min or max?
Max. It's going to take 3 months min because they've got to build up a stockpile, test it, get it working so idiots can make it work, and then between 3 months later, let's say, it's just going to be everywhere. So turn off NFC on your iPhone, everybody, in about a month or two.
No, you don't have to turn off NFC, actually. You just need to turn off, and that's actually what they recommended in the paper, is just this transport mode, which that's not what Apple calls it.
The express transit or something like that. Yeah.
So you just need to, within Apple Pay, you just need to turn off this express transit travel feature, and you're fine. That's all you need to do.
But again, that's a convenience.
You have an
thing.
extra step when you go through the turnstile to pay at the turnstile. You got to unlock your phone and then tap it. Just a bit of inconvenience.
On the security versus usability spectrum, it's really not that big a deal.
Yeah, you still don't have to go to the kiosk and load up an Oyster card, so it's still more convenient than that, right?
This is very true. Very true. Very well said, sir. I remember the Oyster cards talk that got pulled. How many years ago was that?
I don't know. I only know past and future and present. Specifics I've lost track of entirely.
What that means is you're old.
Especially with the pandemic. It does. It does.
Especially with
I've counted many years.
If you've ever, ridden the subway at rush hour, though, being able to tap, dip, slide your fare card or whatever, and have the turnstile open up immediately, that's a huge deal, especially for, in this case, the merchant is the transit authority. So I'm sure I happen to, have a client that was a transit authority for almost 2 years, a couple of years ago, and their fare card was a MasterCard debit card, their own brand. So very familiar with the challenges, but boy, they absolutely are sensitive to, as soon as the tap or dip or whatever happens, they want that turnstile to open in microseconds. So anything that's going to help with the convenience of that is going to be what they're promoting. Again, I think there's a lack of, who's Apple answering to? A bunch of researchers or their customers?
Their customers.
Right? And their customers are not
time.
clamoring for change. Their customers like, hey, it works. People are getting through the turnstile. We're good. It's not a PCI
but then when
violation.
They lose their $1,000. They're going to be, why didn't you protect us? Why didn't you protect us?
Yeah, but it won't be on the merchant though. It'll be on, that'll be on Apple or Visa, and they can have the pissing contest in court. Be interesting to see how PREA would weigh in on this. Who's ultimately liable?
I mean, it's the acquiring bank that's going to eat the costs, right, on the fraud from this, if fraud does occur.
Yeah, but in this case, yes, technically, but given that they're sort of doing a relay attack, and it would be hard to find the point of common interaction. Where's the fraud happening? But yes, the short answer is yes. It would be on the acquiring bank, and that's when they would care, not the merchant, but the merchant's acquiring bank.
Yeah, wherever it goes when you do a chargeback, because some of the people might, when they see this, they might have to go through a chargeback process and say, I don't recognize this charge, because it's going to be a different merchant. It's not going to be the transit merchant. It's not going to be, whatever the charge is when you go through the turnstile. It could be anything, because they're not limiting the merchant type.
Yeah, and that was sort of what I thought was the creative and nefarious part of this attack, is the fact that the relay could be happening anywhere. If they have an internet connection, they could be sending it across the globe to try to initiate a transaction, either to collect money or to pay for another service. That's just going to make the investigation of the fraud that much harder. Finding that point of common interaction. Where's all this fraud happening? Where's it all starting from? Doesn't mean that they don't figure it out, because trust me, the card brands have invested quite a bit of money in fraud detection and fraud prevention. If you've ever tried to use one of your cards in a way, especially a corporate card, in a way that's not normally expected to be a business or travel transaction, and you've had your card declined, and you're told to call them to authorize it. It's a pain in the ass, but they
And criminals do know this. So sometimes when you see stolen credit cards, they will find a mule within like 200 miles of you or whatever that fraud threshold is. And they'll have them take out $600 from an ATM within that many miles from you because they know what some of those fraud controls are. So they're not all smart, but some of them are clever enough to get around fraud controls.
Yeah, I've had gas station fuel companies as several of them as customers over the years. Very common fraud practice is to pay for $1 of gas at the pump, and then go inside to the convenience store and buy cartons of cigarettes that they can turn around and monetize by selling it on the street. Very common fraud practice. And the gas stations are acutely aware that that's an attack method. That's a way of proving that the card's valid. I was in the line at my local grocery store. It's been a couple years ago, and the guy in front of me, I wasn't paying attention. I was just standing in line. But after it happened, it occurred to me the guy in front of me, he had a whole bunch of stuff that he was trying to buy, cigarettes, and he was trying to use a card. And it was declined. So he tried another one and it was declined. And he tried another one and it was declined. And he finally walked away. And afterwards, oh crap, I was just witnessing an attempted fraud. And I should have noticed that earlier and notified somebody. Because the checkout clerk was like, I got to sweep up all this product that they didn't, buy and put it back on the shelf type of thing. But that's exactly what was happening. He hadn't gone and tried to buy $1 of gas, unfortunately. Anyway, Apple, change your habits. Do something about this. We can move on. We can close. Whatever it's your show, Adrian. What do you want to do?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good note to end on. So thanks to the researchers, Andrea Radu and the other folks in the UK who worked on this, put together the source code, wrote the paper. I don't think it's something that can only happen in a lab. I hope you get some movement on this. So with that, thanks to Tyler, who had to drop off a bit early. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Josh, for joining me today and helping me out without Paul here. This is not my show. This is very different from Enterprise Security Weekly, where I'm the main host of that show now. So it's a different experience for me. I don't usually drink wine during Enterprise Security Weekly, but cheers and thank you for joining me.